that now for the next, till he does come. Just be that way. Because he is coming. Do you believe that? And please, it's always a little depressing to remind people, but whenever you die, as far as you're concerned, he came. Your next conscious thought is the coming of the Lord. Right? And so, you don't know when it's going to be. Don't let that day overtake you as a thief. Death can overtake you as a thief. You want to be ready now for that time. You know, there's a fascinating story in history. I read a book called Rescue at the Top of the World. I may have shared that with you once time. It's about the Point Barrow Overland Relief Expedition. That's the long title. The story very quickly is, back in 1897, a group of 8 whaling ships that were up near Point Barrow in the Arctic Sea, whaling. They'd been driven there because of the Civil War. They were shooting whaling ships, and so a lot of them went around South America, and by this time they'd started to discover all the whales that were up in the West Arctic Sea up there. And they had a very early fall, and a number of the ships, 8 of them, with 265 men, were trapped in the ice. They had anticipated getting out sooner, getting back to San Francisco. They did not have enough provisions to make it through the winter. Some of the ships that got away saw that they were trapped in the ice. Word got back to President McKinley, and he sent a message saying, "We understand there's some whalers that are trapped, and they are in dire straits." Now, the problem is they have no electricity back then. You can't radio them. They have no roads. They have no airplanes. They can't take a boat to rescue them. The sea is frozen. The only thing they can do is send an expedition by land, but they're going to be starving. They're sure they're going to die of sickness, cold, starvation, cannibalism, something. Got 260 men and no food. It's going to be pretty desperate. By the way, coldest place on earth in the winter. And so McKinley sent a message to organize an emergency expedition. They took a ship as far north as they could, and they put them off there in Alaska. And there were 3 officers. This was the very primitive Coast Guard, you might say. Lieutenant David H. Jarvis. There was Lieutenant Ellsworth P. Berthoff and Surgeon Samuel Call. They had to organize a team of dog sleds, but they can't carry enough food and themselves survive going across 1,600 miles of Alaskan wilderness in the very worst time of year. The Eskimos said, "You're crazy." And that ought to tell you something. So what their plan was is that about halfway there was a mission station where, fortunately, the government decided to start breeding reindeer to supply the ships a couple of years earlier. And there were about 360 reindeer. This is the only way we're going to get food, is to drive it on the hoof to these men, which means they'd have to drive reindeer like 800 miles across Alaska in December and January and February. It was the most amazing thing. Well, these whalers that were up there, things were getting pretty desperate. A few of them died of hunger and sickness. They're in this broken down cabin with no heat. They're trying to burn pieces of the ship. They're trying to hunt for polar bear or anything they can to stay alive. It's one of the most amazing expeditions. They knew help was coming, but they didn't know when. So their job was to try to stay alive and keep everybody else alive while they did their best to cope. Well, finally they did make it. They got there in, I think, March. You can imagine what their circumstances might have been by then. They reached Point Barrow on March. They had traveled 1,600 miles by sled. These, especially 3 men, made the whole expedition. Never lost anyone in the expedition. You should read the story. It's an amazing story of what they went through, how providentially they were saved time and time again by some miracle so they could get this. Picked up the reindeer and had to drive reindeer. It was dark most of the time. You realize that? It's dark most of the time that they're doing this. So it's like they're in the dark with these primitive sleds trying to drive reindeer, running ahead and pushing sleds. Just an incredible thing to get to these men. They were prepared to die to try to save these men. The Lord hasn't forgotten about us, has he? He's coming back again. And it often seems like it's going to be at the darkest moment We may not know the day and the hour, but we know he is coming, and we know the time is near. We want to be ready for that time. Amen?